My sister lied to get my job, so I exposed her at the company retreat. I never thought my own sister would stab me in the back like this. The whole mess started 6 months ago when I was interviewing for this amazing position at a tech startup downtown. I had been grinding for years, building my portfolio, networking like crazy, and finally felt ready for this next step. The role was perfect project coordination with creative freedom and decent pay. I was so excited after the first interview that I made the mistake of telling my sister everything about it over dinner at Mom's house. She seemed genuinely happy for me, asking all the right questions about the company culture and responsibilities. What I didn't know was that she was taking mental notes for her own twisted plan. My sister had been struggling to find steady work for months, jumping between freelance gigs and getting increasingly desperate. I should have seen the warning signs when she started asking really specific questions about my interview process, the hiring manager's name, and even what I wore to the meeting. The next week, I got the rejection email. They said they went with someone who was a better cultural fit, which stung because I thought the interview went so well. I was devastated but tried to bounce back quickly. That's when I started noticing weird things. My sister suddenly seemed more confident, talking about some exciting opportunity she couldn't share details about yet. She was being secretive about her phone calls and would quickly switch browser tabs when I walked into the room. I didn't connect the dots until I ran into my friend from college who works in recruiting. She mentioned seeing my sister's LinkedIn profile and was confused because it looked almost identical to mine. Same skills, similar project descriptions, even some of the same volunteer work that I had done alone. My heart sank as I realized what might have happened. I immediately pulled up her profile and felt sick to my stomach. She had completely copied my professional background and was presenting it as her own experience. But the real shock came when I discovered she had actually gotten the job I applied for. I did some digging through mutual connections and found out she had applied to the same company just days after my interview. She used my portfolio, my project examples, and even referenced conversations I had with the hiring manager. The worst part was that she had somehow gotten inside information about what they were looking for and tailored her fake application perfectly. I felt like I was living in some nightmare where my own sister had stolen my identity and my future. The rage was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I wanted to call her immediately and confront her, but I knew I needed proof and a plan. I started screenshotting everything, her LinkedIn profile, her fake portfolio website, even some Instagram posts where she was bragging about her new job without mentioning the company name. I also reached out to some contacts who might have more information about how she pulled this off. My cousin worked in HR at a different company and helped me understand the legal implications. What my sister did wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially fraud. She had misrepresented her qualifications and experience to get hired, which could have serious consequences for both her and the company. But I wanted to be strategic about how I handled this. Going to the police felt too extreme, and I knew confronting her directly would just lead to denials and excuses. That's when I learned about the company retreat. My sister had been posting cryptic photos on social media about some work trip coming up, and through some detective work, I figured out it was a quarterly team building event at a resort upstate. The company she stole from me was small enough that everyone would be there, including the CEO and the hiring manager who had rejected me. I realized this could be the perfect opportunity to expose her lies in front of everyone who mattered. I spent weeks preparing for what I was going to do. I gathered all the evidence, created a timeline of events, and even found some of my original work files that she had copied. I also practiced what I would say, trying to strike the right balance between being professional and making sure everyone understood the gravity of what she had done. The hardest part was acting normal around her during family dinners, pretending I didn't know anything while she continued to lie about her success. The retreat was scheduled for a weekend in early fall, and I knew I needed to get there somehow. I couldn't just show up uninvited, so I came up with a plan that felt like something out of a movie. I contacted the retreat venue and pretended to be from a catering company that needed to confirm details about the event. Through that call, I got the exact location, timing, and even some details about the schedule. I booked a room at the same resort under a different name and prepared for the most important confrontation of my life. Then my sister made a mistake that changed everything completely. 2 days before the retreat, she called me in a panic. She had been assigned to give a presentation about one of the major projects she claimed to have led, but she was completely lost because she had no idea what she was talking about. The project was something I had actually worked on extensively, and she was asking me to help her prepare without admitting why she needed the help. This was my moment to really understand how deep her deception went. I pretended to be supportive and offered to help her practice. What I learned during that conversation was shocking. She didn't understand even the basic concepts of the work she claimed to have done. She had memorized some buzzwords and surface-level explanations, but when pressed for details, she fell apart completely. I realized that her colleagues were probably starting to notice inconsistencies in her performance, which might make my eventual revelation even more impactful. I also discovered that she had been struggling in the role more than I expected. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed and stressed, constantly worried about being found out. Part of me almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered that she had stolen an opportunity that was rightfully mine and had been lying to everyone, including our family, for months. My sympathy quickly turned back to determination to expose her. The morning of the retreat, I drove up to the resort with my evidence folder and a knot in my stomach. I had never done anything like this before, and I was terrified of how it might affect our family relationships. But I also knew that letting her get away with this would eat at me forever, and she would probably continue lying and cheating in other situations. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing not just for me, but for everyone she was deceiving. I spent the first few hours of the day observing from a distance, watching her interact with her colleagues and trying to gauge the group dynamics. She seemed nervous and kept checking her phone, probably reviewing notes for her presentation. I noticed that some of her coworkers seemed frustrated with her performance on certain topics, which confirmed my suspicion that her lies were already starting to catch up with her. The presentation was scheduled for after lunch, and I planned to make my move right before she went on stage. I wanted maximum impact and witnesses, but I also wanted to give her a chance to come clean voluntarily. I approached her during the lunch break and suggested we talk privately. My heart was pounding as I led her to a quiet corner of the resort lobby. But when I confronted her, she doubled down on her lies in the most shocking way. Instead of admitting what she had done or showing any remorse, she attacked me. She claimed that I was jealous of her success and that I was trying to sabotage her career out of spite. She even suggested that maybe I wasn't as qualified as I thought I was, since I didn't get the job in the first place. The audacity was breathtaking, and it made me realize that she had convinced herself that she deserved what she had stolen from me. She also revealed that she had been planning this for longer than I realized. She admitted that she had been watching my career progress and looking for opportunities to capitalize on my hard work. She said she felt entitled to the job because she needed it more than I did, and that I would have other opportunities. The complete lack of guilt or self-awareness was almost more shocking than the original betrayal. When I showed her some of the evidence I had collected, she started to panic. She begged me not to say anything, promising that she would quit the job and make it right somehow. But I could tell she was just trying to buy time to figure out how to spin the situation in her favor. She had lied to me for months, and I had no reason to trust that she would suddenly start telling the truth now. I told her she had until the end of lunch to decide whether she wanted to come clean to her colleagues herself, or if I would do it for her. She chose to storm off instead, probably hoping I would chicken out or that she could somehow prevent me from going through with my plan. But I had come too far to back down now, and her reaction had actually strengthened my resolve. The afternoon session was starting, and I could see her setting up for her presentation. She looked pale and shaky, constantly glancing around the room like she was expecting me to appear at any moment. I positioned myself near the back of the conference room where I could see everyone's faces, but wouldn't be immediately noticed. The hiring manager was in the front row, and the CEO was sitting at a table off to the side. My sister started her presentation, and it was immediately obvious that she was struggling. She stumbled over basic terminology and gave vague, confusing explanations for things that should have been straightforward. I could see some of her colleagues exchanging concerned glances, and the hiring manager was taking notes with a serious expression. This was actually working out better than I had hoped. Her own incompetence was setting up my revelation perfectly. About halfway through her presentation, I stood up and walked toward the front of the room. The entire room turned to look at me, and I could see my sister's face go white with terror. I introduced myself calmly and asked if I could address the group about some concerns I had regarding the presentation. The CEO looked confused but gestured for me to continue, probably thinking I was some kind of consultant or expert who had been invited to provide feedback. Then I dropped the bombshell that changed everything forever. I explained that I was the person who had originally developed the project she was presenting, and that she had stolen my work to get hired by their company. I presented the evidence clearly and professionally, showing the timeline of events and the documentation that proved she had copied my portfolio and experience. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of people shuffling through the papers I had distributed. The hiring manager's face went from confusion to recognition to absolute horror as he realized what had happened. He remembered my interview and could see the clear connections between my original work and what my sister had been presenting as her own. The CEO looked furious and started asking pointed questions about how this could have happened and what safeguards they had in place to prevent this kind of fraud. My sister tried to defend herself, but her explanations were incoherent and contradictory. She claimed that we had worked together on the projects, then switched to saying that I was lying out of jealousy, then finally broke down crying and admitted that she had been struggling and made a terrible mistake. The room was incredibly tense, and I could see her colleagues looking at her with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. The CEO immediately called for a break and asked to speak with me privately. He was mortified about what had happened and wanted to understand the full scope of the situation. I explained everything from the beginning, including how I had discovered her deception and why I had chosen to expose her at the retreat. He was actually impressed with how I had handled the situation and said that the company would be conducting a full investigation. What happened next was beyond anything I had expected. The CEO offered me the position on the spot, saying that my professionalism and the quality of my work spoke for themselves. He also mentioned that they had been having concerns about my sister's performance and that my revelation explained a lot of the issues they had been experiencing. I was so shocked that I could barely respond, but I managed to accept the offer and arrange to start the following week. My sister was escorted out of the retreat immediately, and I later learned that she was terminated that same day. The company also decided to review their hiring practices to prevent similar situations in the future. I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. I had gotten justice, but I had also destroyed my relationship with my sister and potentially caused permanent damage to our family. The ride home was surreal. I kept replaying the events in my head, wondering if I had done the right thing. I knew that I would have to face my family and explain what had happened, which was almost as terrifying as the confrontation itself. I also realized that starting this new job would be complicated, since everyone would know the circumstances of how I got there. But as I drove through the mountains heading back to the city, I felt a sense of closure and empowerment that I had never experienced before. I had stood up for myself in a way that felt impossible just a few months earlier, and I had refused to let someone else's lies define my future. The job was mine now, and I had earned it through my own merit and determination. The aftermath was exactly as complicated as I had expected. My parents were devastated when they learned what had happened, and initially blamed me for handling the situation so publicly. They felt that I should have worked things out privately within the family, and they were embarrassed about how it would look to their friends and extended family. My sister refused to speak to me and moved back in with our parents, claiming that I had ruined her life and her career prospects. But over time, the truth of what she had done became impossible to ignore. Other family members started sharing stories about times when she had lied or taken credit for things she didn't do, and my parents began to understand that this was part of a larger pattern of behavior. They eventually came around to supporting me, though they still hoped that my sister and I would somehow reconcile. I started the new job with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. My colleagues were professional and welcoming, but I could tell that everyone was aware of the unusual circumstances. I worked harder than I had ever worked before, determined to prove that I deserved the position and that I wasn't just there because of the drama. Within a few months, I had established myself as a valuable team member, and the initial awkwardness faded away. The most surprising part of the whole experience was how much it changed my confidence and self-advocacy skills. I had always been someone who avoided conflict and tried to keep the peace, but standing up to my sister had shown me that I was capable of fighting for what I deserved. I started speaking up more in meetings, negotiating better terms for myself, and refusing to let people take advantage of my work. My sister eventually found another job, though I heard through family members that she had learned her lesson and was being honest about her qualifications. We haven't spoken directly in over a year, but I hope that someday we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty. I miss the closeness we used to have, but I don't regret exposing her lies. Looking back on the whole situation, I realized that my sister's betrayal was actually a turning point that changed my life for the better. I got the job I deserved, learned to stand up for myself, and discovered that I was stronger and more resourceful than I had ever imagined. The company retreat that was supposed to be her moment of triumph became the stage for my own vindication, and I couldn't have asked for a better ending to such a painful chapter of my life.